creating a family for queer folks in North America may cost a lot of money, but beyond that, so far, it isn't something that we necessarily have to spend a ton of time and resources fighting for. But that isn't the case in Ireland and in other parts of the world. At least in Ireland, queer parents are allowed to have children and create a family through surrogacy or adoption, but that isn't the case all around the world. Today, I am talking with Seamus Carney Martoni, and we have the opportunity to not just talk about Irish law and where it is and where it's going, good, bad, and ugly, but also about the family that he and his husband have created both through adoption and through surrogacy and what that looks like for them. Welcome to the Becoming Baby Ready podcast, your podcast for queer family planning. My name is Sam, and throughout this podcast, you'll hear me have conversations with professionals who work alongside people who want to start and grow their families, as well as parents of intentionally created families. Everyone I speak to identifies as being part of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. This is your opportunity to learn answers to questions you didn't even know you had. Welcome, everyone. Today, I have the opportunity to be visiting with Seamus Carney Martoni from across the pond, as it were, in Ireland, where it's much later in the day than it is here. I am happy to have you join us and tell us all about who you are, the members of your family, and just life in general. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing okay. I've had a fun day of work and then taking care of my two kids. We did some pumpkin carving for Halloween
There you
today.
are.
That was fun. It was chaotic with a 4 and a 1-year-old, but it is. That's what life is at the moment with two
Yep.
smallies. So yeah, but I've had a good day. How has your day been?
My day's been okay. I had a plumber in to fix a leak in the kitchen, but other than that, it's been pretty smooth. I'm having some fantastic conversations today. Thank you so much. So
Yeah.
you're the dad of, or you are a dad of two young children. Tell us more about that. Tell us about your partner and how long you've been together, when you started on this family creation pathway, and how did you get those kids?
It's a long story, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Um, So my husband and my now husband and I met in May 2007. Sorry, we met before. We went about a year prior to that. Just in like an LGBTQ plus bar in Dublin. We just all happened to be out with friends. Initially, it didn't go too well for my husband and I. We had that kind of, you know, early adulthood friction. Um, so I was 19 and he was 21, and yeah, we just didn't get on very well at the start. But what we ultimately realized is that we kind of both fancied each other, and that was probably the reason why there was so much friction. So we eventually ended up becoming boyfriends in May 2007, and we've been together ever since. We moved in together in 2010. My husband bought his own house at that point in time. He asked me to marry him in 2012. And we had our civil partnership in March 2014. And people ask, why did you have a civil partnership? Well, at that point in time in Ireland, there was no such thing as civil marriage for same-sex couples. And we knew that there was a marriage equality referendum coming up in 2015, but in reality, we didn't think that that was actually going to pass. So we were just like, well, hey, let's just go ahead with what we have at the moment. We had a beautiful family wedding here in Dublin, and we had a great day. And then obviously the marriage equality referendum happened in 2015, and it passed. So suddenly there was this opportunity for us to get married again. So we were like, hey, will we do this? So we did. Obviously a much smaller affair. But we did have another day out in March 2016, just with close friends and family. And we officially got married then. And I think it was at that point in time that we really started talking about having kids. What I always say when I'm asked about, when did you think about having a family? We never thought about it. For two reasons, really. First of all, when we were initially starting to go out, we were very young. But aside from that, there was no really there was no option to have children. You know, people weren't doing it. I'd never heard of surrogacy really, and at that point in time, the Adoption Act in Ireland didn't cover same-sex couples, so it was what it was. We were just going to be a couple, and that was it. Having said that, we always subconsciously, and I say subconsciously because we never actually spoke about it, we always wanted to have a family. I mean, in 2010, we got two dogs, you know, and they were our babies for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it wasn't really until we got married in 2016 that we went, okay, maybe we do want children. And then we came to realize that actually the Adoption Act in Ireland had been amended in 2015, and actually now same sex couples could adopt. So we started making our inquiries. Initially, we then started reaching out to same sex couples who had been through either the process of adoption or surrogacy. And obviously, the question then was, you know, do we go down the route of adoption or do we go down the route of surrogacy? And, you know, what are the pros and cons with both? So we met a surrogacy solicitor or attorney here in Ireland, Fiona Duffy, and we had a conversation with her just about what the reality would be legally for a same-sex couple who would go down the route of either surrogacy or adoption. And what we realised at that point in time was that if we adopted either domestically or internationally, then both my husband and I would be the legal parents of our child. If we went through an international or indeed a domestic surrogacy journey, only the biological father would be seen as parent in the eyes of the Irish law. The surrogate would continue to be seen as the mother. So that was a bit of a concern for us. So for that reason, and for the reason that we were still both quite young, we felt we had a bit of time. So we said, right, let's go down the adoption route. That is our chosen pathway, and that's what we're going to do. So we contacted TUSLA here in Ireland, who are the Child Protection Agency, and we started there. We went to one of their information talks just about what the reality of adoption would be here in Ireland, and it was fairly eye-opening. We learned that you could adopt domestically in Ireland, but the reality was there hadn't been many domestic same-sex adoptions. Actually, I don't think there had ever been a successful one in Ireland where a same-sex couple were chosen to adopt a child. And the only international location that Irish people can adopt from, same-sex couples can adopt from, is the US from Ireland. So it was a chance. We knew that there was limitations around it, but we decided to go for it. We entered the adoption approval process with TUSLA, which involved a huge amount of paperwork, medical records, financial records. At the time, both my husband and I smoked cigarettes, and they told us that we needed to stop, so we did that. I am not in any way saying that I am not happy that we did that, because I'm glad that I'm a non-smoker now, but at the time I wasn't too happy about that I was being told to do it. But anyway, that's an aside. So we did those kind of initial checks with TUSLA, and then you're invited into group sessions. So we were in a group session with I think 8 other couples, and there were 2 single applicants in that session as well. And I think it was 6 Friday mornings every second week, where you'd basically sit there and discuss the reality of adoption. They leaned quite heavily into like institutionalization for children who might come from Vietnam or countries other than the US. So it was eye-opening, but it wasn't really reflective or applicable to us. But anyway, we it's part of the process, so we did it. And then after that, I think that overall that took about 3 months to complete, between breaks and every second week. After that, then you're assigned a social worker. That process took a little while as well. We were eventually assigned a social worker, I think, in September 2018. They'd conduct a number of home visits. So we had several interviews and meetings in our home to discuss ourselves, our background, the relationships that we have with our family, our friends, our own relationship, finances, safety, etc., etc. Anything that you can imagine that might be discussed was discussed.
Right.
So then there's a few processes that have to go through, and we were approved through them all. Our home study report was written up. It's quite a hefty document, and And ultimately, that then goes to the Adoption Authority of Ireland, and the Adoption Authority of Ireland deemed my husband and I to be, they gave us our declaration of eligibility and suitability to adopt in July 2019.
Mm-hmm.
So we thought to ourselves, well, that's it. We're going to like adopt a baby any day now. We're 75% of the way there. So we started working with an intermediary agency here in Ireland based in Cork. They're called Helping Hands, and they are linked up with an adoption agency in the US, Adoption Arc. And we made our application to Adoption Arc to be placed on the matching list. And again, there's a lot more paperwork that needs to be done. I won't bore you with the details. And we did all that, and we eventually were added to the matching list. So again, that was another kind of milestone for us. Again, we had that overwhelming feeling of, oh, we're going to adopt a baby any day now. And then what happened in the world? COVID shut it down. So in early 2020, obviously COVID happened. The rate at which adoptions were happening in the US slowed down significantly. Mm-hmm. So we felt quite a feeling of overwhelming sadness.
Sure.
At the same time, we still felt that we had a bit of time to continue with the process. So we did that. We actually enjoyed the start of COVID. It was our first time to be at home together forever. Everyone remembers that kind of start feeling where you're at home and you get to we're working from home, but at the same time we're together, and we went for walks every evening. Anyway, then in July 2020, we get a phone call to say that birth mom in the US had selected us to parent her baby. She was 6 months pregnant at the time, and this was very exciting. The option was whether we accepted the match or not, so we decided to accept the match. She was due to have the baby in September 2020, and we very excitedly told all of our family and friends that we had accepted this match, that we were preparing to go to the US. At the time, you had to get a special visa waiver to fly to the US, so we went ahead and we did that, obviously because of COVID and travel restrictions. And we had several meetings over Zoom with a birth mom. And she gave birth in early September 2020 to a little baby boy. We were making our final travel plans to go to the US. He was born on a Monday, and on the Friday evening, we learned that she was having doubt about continuing with the adoption process. And on the Saturday morning, it was confirmed that she had made a really difficult decision, that she was going to parent her baby herself. And people questioned, and because we told so many people, everyone had an opinion then. Mm-hmm. People questioned her motives, our motives, what the reality of the situation was. And the reality of the situation is she ultimately decided bravely to parent her child, and we can never have anything but respect for that person.
Absolutely.
But obviously for us as a couple, that had a huge, huge detrimental impact, probably more so on me, on my mental well-being. Things got a little bit dark for a while. It was probably my first real life example personally of suffering from my mental health being in quite sharp decline. But thankfully, with the help of a counsellor, and my husband was amazing, I have to say. And we were still kind of in the COVID restrictions, so there was a lot of walking that happened, which helped. Our dogs were amazing as well. So we got through it, but we did then continue to feel that overwhelming feeling that adoption was just not going to ever happen for us. So at that point in time, we started toying with the idea of surrogacy while remaining on the adoption matching list. So we did a little bit of investigating. We, in a more real way, started speaking with couples who had gone through the process. And at this point in time, because we had started the adoption process in 2017, a lot more couples had now gone through kind of the surrogacy journey.
Sure. Yeah.
So there were some really good real life examples, pros, cons, do's and don'ts of surrogacy. So we took all that advice on board, but we were coming up towards the first anniversary, or we'll say the first birthday of that baby that we had our failed adoption with. And that to me felt like it was going to be a milestone event. And it was. We were actually in Spain when it was his first birthday, and it was an utterly devastating day. When I think back now, I cried all day. I screamed at the sea, I screamed at the clouds, but ultimately I felt the release of the sadness on that day. I can't describe it. And then the strangest thing happened. The very next day, we get a phone call. So we're sitting by the pool in Spain, and I was having a beer at the time, actually. And I got a phone call, but it was from the intermediary adoption agency in Ireland. And normally, when they would be ringing, it would be like, we need to update some of your paperwork, and something has expired, and blah blah. So I actually showed the phone to my husband, and I said, "Oh God, they're ringing." And he said, "Oh, don't bother. Like, we're on holidays. We'll deal with it when we go home." And I just said, "No, I'm actually going to answer it, because whatever it is, at least I'll know what I need to sort out when I get back." So I answered the phone, and the lady from Helping Hands said, "Are you sitting down?" And I said, "No, but I can." She said, I recommend that you sit down. I want to let you know that you have been selected by another birth mom. This time around, baby has been born. I think at that point she was 3 or 4 days old. And birth mom has already signed the surrender papers. So she can never take custody of this baby girl again. How would you like to proceed? So I'm by the pool with all of my in-laws. I forgot to mention my parents-in-law and my sister-in-law and her husband were there. And remember, because we'd had such a public failed adoption, not public failed adoption, but we told so many friends and family,
Sure.
we decided if we ever got matched again, we weren't going to tell anybody. It was going to be like we'd end up in the US, and once we were holding whatever baby, then we tell people. But obviously, my in-laws were around, so the process then is that you have to be sent the medical background of the child. So we got that. Then there's like a panic to try and get a pediatrician. I tell you, that's not easy when you're in the middle of Spain, trying to contact Ireland, find a pediatrician to help you look at the medical records. So there was a lot of time spent in a hotel room in Spain. But ultimately, we decided that we were going to accept the match. So then the journey had to happen. Again, remember, we're still kind of in COVID times.
Mm-hmm.
Back to Spain, or back from Spain to Ireland, and then from Ireland to the US. So we flew to the US. I think we were matched on like the Friday, and we were in the US by the following Wednesday.
Wow. So you went fast.
We went for it, and we had to quarantine for a week, so we couldn't meet the baby for 1 week, and then we had to do a COVID test. So we had to do the official PCR test. But yeah, so we came back COVID negative, which is great. And the next day we got to meet our little baby girl, Maisie, who's now 4. She was 15 days old when we met her. And I'm not going to say it was the most amazing day of my life, but it was right up there as one of the most amazing days of both of our lives, my husband and I.
Mm-hmm.
And she was so quiet and peaceful and sleepy and a wonderful newborn baby, nothing like she is now.
She had
She
to
is,
grow into her voice, did she?
she grew into her voice, and let me tell you, she's found a girl. But she's amazing. She's amazing. We absolutely adore her. She's got the biggest personality in the house, and we absolutely love her for it. So we were in the US for 3 months with Maisie. You have to stay there for quite some time in order to fulfill the court process. So nothing can happen for the first 6 weeks, and then it took about, I think it was 5 weeks then after that to not finalize, but to grant permanent guardianship of Maisie into our care for us to fly back to Ireland. And then in October the following year, after several post-placement assessments from a social worker, we could finalise her adoption. So in October 2022, we finalised Maisie's adoption. So, woo, she was now our forever baby, and she had 2 parents, my husband and I, and that was key for us at that point in time. When we realistically started talking about having kids back in 2017, we always looked at the number, maybe we might have 3. When Maisie came along, that quickly changed to 2. Um, so then the question was, did we want to have another child? And if so, how were we going to do it? Because we had investigated surrogacy in so much detail, we knew a lot about it. And also in my position as chairperson of Irish Gay Dads in Ireland, I knew a lot about, I guess, the legalities of it. And I know you want to touch on that in a little bit. We decided, basically because of what had happened with the adoption process, we felt that we probably had a few PTSDs around that,
Sure.
that maybe surrogacy might be a better avenue for us for the second route. And I have to say, I've heard so many stories. I've heard the good, the bad, the ugly
Mm-hmm.
of surrogacy. But when it came to our situation, it actually was very, very straightforward. We flew to Las Vegas, where we created our embryos. Our egg donor created a huge number of eggs. So I think we ended up with something like 14 or 15 embryos,
Wow.
which is huge. We were matched with a surrogate in the US very quickly. So that was unusual.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we accepted the match immediately because she was and is an amazing person. And when when the first embryo transfer happened, it worked. So we fell pregnant with our little baby on the first try. So we were like, something has to go wrong here. But it didn't. So we did a gender reveal, which was amazing. We found out we were having a little baby boy. And we flew to the US, over to Utah in the US, in January 2024 for his birth. So we were present for his birth. And again, just the most wonderful experience. As I said, my daughter and my son, right up there in the best experiences of my life. He is a very quiet baby. Well, it was a very quiet baby. We're now heading towards, he's 21 months, so he's heading towards those terrible twos. But he's a very placid little guy. His big sister loves him ferociously,
Mm-hmm.
and we do feel, in terms of having children, that our family is probably complete. I never say never. My husband disagrees.
I do love that you threw the word probably in there, just in
Yeah,
case.
just in case. Yeah, caveat. I don't want this error to be brought up in the future where I said either way. So.
Fair.
But yeah, I guess for the moment, our family is complete, and we love our daughter and our son so much. I guess the only difference for the two of them now is that Matteo, who's our son, he's 21 months old. He when we got back to Ireland, there's a process that you have to go through. And I know this is what you want to touch on.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lack of surrogacy legislation in Ireland at the moment. So what you have to do is this process where you have to prove the parentage of the biological father. So that involves doing a DNA test. You can either do it in the US or Ireland. We chose to do it in Ireland. And then there's a high court process that you have to go through in order to get the biological parent a declaration of parentage.
Hold on for just a moment. We'll be right back.
Hi there. I'm Rowan J. Knox, author, speaker, and human rights advocate. I'm also a dad, and my kids are growing up. And now that they are growing up, my partner Danny and I are trying something new. We are opening a trans-owned and operated coffee shop in the heart of Toronto's LGBTQ village. It's going to be called Understory, and we really hope you'll check it out when it opens this winter. If you want to know more, you can visit us at understorycafe.com. See you soon, Toronto.
So we went through that process. Mateo's biological parent has that declaration of parentage. But what that means for the non biological father is that they're a legal stranger. They're as much a legal stranger as you are,
Wow.
which is pretty scary. Particularly when, we've both been there for the night feeds, we've both been there for the temperatures, for the vaccinations, for everything really. We don't see it in any way. We don't treat our children in any way different. The only thing that treats our family different is the law.
And you're right. I did want to touch on this because it is different than in some other places, and yet it's better than some countries where having a child through surrogacy is completely illegal altogether. So, I mean, you find yourself in that yucky, murky middle where you don't have all of the opportunities, but at least you have some of the opportunities. And yet it should be better. In the world that we live in, with the information that we have, it should be better, especially given that you are both legal parents of Maisie. and yet only one of you can be a legal parent of Mateo, and yet you're equally involved in the parenting of both children. Is it a forever thing that whoever is the biologic parent of Mateo, and really that who it is irrelevant to our conversation, but is it ever possible that the person who is not biologically connected could become a legal parent outside of the loss of the legal parent, like the death of the legal parent? Is there an adoption process you can go through like they do in the US? Many
Yeah,
people in the US do a second parent adoption or something. Can you delve into that a little bit?
sure. So I'll do it with kind of two pillars. The pillar being current situation, and then second pillar being proposed future situation. So current situation is what I've already outlined, that the biological parent can become can get their declaration of parentage. What happens to non-biological parent in that situation is once the child turns 2, they can apply for guardianship, which means, if the realities of life happen, that there's a trip to the emergency room, it means that the non-biological parent can take the child to the emergency room, which can't currently happen for our son because he's not 2 yet, and we don't have that. So the biological parent always has to either be around, or if there's a situation where they're not around, they have to be on hand to give authorization for medical treatment should some accident happen that we hope will never happen.
Right.
But I mean, life is life. So yeah, guardianship can happen after 2, and a lot of people do that. We are probably in a situation where we will have to do that, just because his second birthday is fast approaching, and ultimately for the non-biological parent, you want to have that kind of safety net,
Sure.
For your child. And it's not just the emergency room, it's things like, signing them up for a crash, signing them up for school, any kind of documentation where, on that piece of paper it says parent or guardian signature. The non-biological parent currently is not legally allowed to sign that. So that's why you would go through the guardianship process. That's current state. What happens then when the child turns 18? Well, the guardianship falls away. So you go back to being a legal stranger to that child. And that in itself has so many legal implications. We don't even really know what the full extent of them are, because surrogacy is a fairly new pathway to parenthood. So I'm not sure myself of any situation where a child has turned 18, the guardianship is gone, and then, for example, the non-biological parent has passed away. I don't know what would happen in terms of inheritance, for example.
Right.
I don't know of a use case, but I can imagine that there would be obstacles to get around. So that's current situation, pillar 1. Pillar 2 is proposed future state. So, as I mentioned earlier, I'm chairperson of a group in Ireland called Irish Gay Dads. If anyone wants to look them up, they're www.irishgaydads.ie, or at Irish Gay Dads on Instagram. And we have been campaigning for surrogacy legislation for years. In fact, I've only been involved in the campaigning since 2017, but campaigning for surrogacy legislation has been going on in Ireland for over 20 years, which to me just blows my mind. But we're now in a situation where we do have a piece of legislation which has been enacted. Now, what that means is it has been signed into law, into the Irish statute books. It's called the Assisted Human Reproduction Act. And what that will do, before I go into that, it's enacted. So it's sitting there in our legal books, but it's not commenced. And what that means is it's not turned on yet. Nobody can utilise it yet. So future state, for children who have already been born, they are deemed retrospective surrogacy journeys. So Mateo would fall into a retrospective surrogacy journey because he'll have been born before the legislation is commenced. They will hopefully get the declaration of parentage for the non-biological parent. And I say hopefully because there are still hurdles to be overcome. From my reading of the legislation for Mateo, I believe that the non-biological parent will be granted the declaration of parentage, in that we do check all the boxes in terms of what is required to fulfil the law. But there are couples out there who don't. For example, Irish couples living abroad. And I know that you've spoken with my vice chairperson of Irish Gay Dads, Michael Lunny Cannon. He lives in New York with his husband and two beautiful girls. So they're in that legal situation where currently, in the current writing of the Assisted Human Reproduction Act, they won't be protected by it. So they will not get the declaration of parentage for the non-biological parent. So that is not good. We have obviously continued to campaign for that, and we are expecting a amending piece of legislation that will include additional couples, for example, those living abroad. And what has been proposed, in what I've seen proposed so far, again, it'll be more obstacles to overcome, even in that retrospective journey. So if I look at Mark's situation, he may have some obstacles to overcome, like many other couples. So that's retrospective. Future case, so prospective, is even more bleak
Oh, great.
than you can ever imagine. So we live in a world where surrogacy happens. It's the reality of life. It's modern family creation. And the reality of surrogacy is, in many situations, the surrogate will receive a fee above and beyond reasonable expenses. And we, in Irish Gay Dads, believe that to be fair. And the campaigners and advocates that I work alongside in other groups believe that to be fair too. We believe that it to be fair because the surrogate is giving of her time in order to help you create your family. So why wouldn't they receive compensation? The attorneys involved receive compensation. The clinics involved, the agencies involved, everyone gets remunerated for their time. The surrogate. However, for prospective surrogacy situations in Ireland, the surrogate receiving a fee above and beyond legal expenses will be banned. So for couples who want to have a surrogacy journey in the US, for example, so if we're going a few years down the line, Mateo hasn't been born, but we're planning it, and the legislation has been commenced, we wouldn't be able to have Mateo, because in the US, it is a compensated model. The surrogate does receive a fee above and beyond reasonable expenses. And if you look at the majority of locations worldwide, so for same-sex couples, there is already a limited pool of countries that you can have an international surrogacy journey in. But even for opposite sex or single applicants, it's going to be quite a limited scope or area, because the majority of countries are compensated surrogacy models in some way, shape or form. In reality, if you dig down into it, that is the reality. With maybe the exception of Canada, which has an altruistic surrogacy model. What happens then, though, if Canada is the only country, is every single couple that comes from Ireland will be applying to Canada. I'm sure you know this already, but the waiting lists in Canada are already quite long. I mean, you're talking years.
Yep.
If every single couple who has gone through surrogacy journey applying from Ireland starts now applying to Canada, you can imagine what's going to happen with those waiting lists.
Sure.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is the future for couples, we got lucky. So we have our two beautiful children. We've gone through our adoption process, and we've gone through our surrogacy process. Who knows what will happen in the future? But for now, we're lucky. We have our two beautiful children, and retrospectively, I think that we'll be protected by the Irish law. But if I think about my husband and I, had we been 10 years younger, it would be a fairly bleak situation for a same-sex couple trying to consider having a child through surrogacy. So we continue to campaign. As I mentioned, we're waiting for that amending legislation to come through that will hopefully protect other couples like Mark's family. I don't think that it will stop there. What we would like to see is, the reality of what happens once the legislation is commenced. In Ireland, we're in the process currently of establishing what's called, now this is a mouthful, an Assisted Human Reproduction Regulatory Authority, the ARA. We're in the process of establishing that, and what they will be responsible for is kind of similar to the process that I mentioned about adoption earlier. They'll be responsible for approving a surrogacy journey before the transfer happens.
Okay.
So before the surrogate falls pregnant. If they have to follow the legislation to the letter of the law, they may not be approving many. So it's unfortunately probably going to be a situation where we'll have to wait and see what happens. For couples who are applying to have a surrogacy journey, will that regulatory authority be extremely focused on the legislation and the requirements of the law? Probably. What will the future state of surrogacy be in Ireland? I don't know. So, are we better being in this current situation where there's no legal framework, but you can still have surrogacy journeys in countries where, compensation models happen? Or are we better having this really, really rigid piece of like prohibiting legislation for future surrogacy journeys?
Right.
And I have like a pro and con list on that in my head. So the con obviously is that for couples, they may not necessarily be able to have children through surrogacy in the future.
Yeah.
But the pro, there has to, whether it's a con, there has to be a pro. The pro is that potentially exploitative surrogacy situations will no longer happen.
Fair.
I'm not going to go into any examples, but all you need to do is hop onto Google and you'll read about exploitative surrogacy situations. So for us as an advocacy group, we've always advocated for the surrogate, the child, and the intended parents to be protected by the law and not to be exploited.
Right.
Particularly for surrogates to be cared for both medically and psychologically, because it's a huge, huge decision
Oh, of course.
to make to become a surrogate for anybody.
I recognize you can speak from one perspective, and that is as an Irish gay dad. But gay dads aren't the only people, or gay men aren't the only people who want to become parents in Ireland. What happens to gay women? What if there's two women who choose to have a baby together, assuming one of them is biologically related to the child, as they've either used their own egg to carry their own egg, or they've fertilized their partner's egg and then done an IVF treatment. One of them is biologically connected to the baby. What is the legal scope there for those children?
Right. So we do have another piece of legislation. It's called the Children and Family Relationships Act. And that is a piece of legislation that same-sex female couples can utilise. And what that does is it outlines a very specific way in which same-sex female couples can have a child. You can do reciprocal IVF. So reciprocal IVF is obviously where you fertilise the egg of your partner and you carry the child as the other female. That is allowed, provided it happens in an Irish setting, Irish clinic. And there are a number of ways in which you can become pregnant in Ireland. And provided you stick within the confines of the legislation, you can carry a child and you will both be named on the child's birth certificate. Where it gets messy is where couples, for very real reasons, don't want to go through an IVF clinic. It's expensive. They have a known donor to them. They want to do it an at-home insemination. It doesn't cost a huge amount. And, there are several same-sex female couples in Ireland who have done that. They fall outside the current legislation. If a same-sex female couple, for example, did reciprocal IVF in a foreign setting, that is not covered under Irish legislation. If they do reciprocal IVF in Ireland, but the baby is born abroad, that is not covered under Irish legislation. So there are so many restrictions for same-sex female couples as well. So that Children and Family Relationships Act is great in that it does give some options, but again, it's restrictive for same-sex female couples. So as part of the Assisted Human Reproduction Act, and alongside other advocacy groups in Ireland, there's an amazing one called Equality for Children and another one called LGBT Ireland. Alongside those guys, we have been campaigning for same-sex female couples as well. Obviously, representing Irish gay dads, have always had more of a focus and understanding of same-sex male couples.
Sure.
But forever an ally, so we absolutely are there alongside our LGBTQ plus community, and will continue to be there to ensure that there's full equality for all. Something that's really important to us recently is ensuring that, as part of that amending piece of legislation that's coming through for the Act, that trans rights are thought about. For for those who identify as trans, that they will be able to have a pathway to parenthood as well.
Right.
Should they choose, just like anybody else.
And I mean, all we can do is try to make other people as aware as possible about all of the pathways to parenthood, but all of the limitations that can be imposed upon people, because so many of us who are not living in that moment of our lives right now are unaware of what is happening around the world. And so while it would infuriate us or frustrate us or make us want to do more, we just don't know that there's something that we should be doing. We haven't been advised that there's anything happening that would need our attention and our focus. How do people around the world who want to help, want to support, want to raise awareness, want to encourage governments like your own to wake up and realize it's 2025 and that families are created in a variety of ways, and that if the children are desperately wanted and loved, because our families don't happen by accident. This isn't a mistake or a thoughtless process that find us in a position where we want to become or are becoming parents. We've spent time and energy and resources and reading and learning and education. We're coming into this with our eyes wide open. We're doing it intentionally. So how do those of us out here help affect some of that change? What is your wisdom and guidance to those of us who want to be the best allies and support from outside that we can be?
Right. So when it comes to things like surrogacy, the world of surrogacy is ever evolving, it's ever changing. And I say that because, some locations that same sex couples, not just same sex couples, everybody has been using historically, have now become, places that mightn't be very safe to have a surrogacy journey in. So the world of surrogacy is evolving all the time. So that's one thing. I guess, what can people do there? Well, if it interests you, look at the news in terms of surrogacy and what's changed over the last number of years. One thing that I've done is probably in my interest as chairperson of Irish Gay Dads is I've reached out to a number of advocacy groups, both in Europe and worldwide, just to see kind of what's happening on the ground in other countries. So, in some European countries, they're banning surrogacy outright. And those advocacy groups are having huge battles on their hands in order to try and continue to have any options of having children. So that is a way that, anyone can follow Irish Gay Dads, they can follow Equality for Children, they can follow LGBT Ireland, and that will give you the current state of play in Ireland and where we're at in terms of advancing the legislation. And oftentimes we put asks out there for people to reshare key messages that we're trying to get out there. We've, over the years, done a huge amount of petitioning. We've done a huge amount of email campaigns. And in reality, what would an email from somebody across the pond mean? Well, it actually means a huge amount. It would show our government here in Ireland that, not only Irish people are reflecting on their treatment of same-sex couples trying to become parents, but people across the pond are actually looking at it too, and they care. And I think that's really important. So I think as a community, my best piece of advice is to stay informed, follow good advocacy groups if it interests you, obviously. And, if they do put direct asks out there, then fulfill them.
Right.
Oftentimes, with advancing technology, things are wonderful nowadays, aren't they? So Mark actually in New York is brilliant. He'll whip together an email campaign in an hour, and it's a very simple thing where you just have to click a button, put your name at the bottom of the email, and it's gone. And that's so effective. It has been so effective for us in terms of getting ourselves a seat at the table. So, yeah, follow good advocacy groups, stay informed, and I guess if anyone has any direct questions about Irish legislation. And it's interesting, we have had people reach out to us from other locations who might just be half thinking about they might have Irish heritage, for example.
Right.
There might be a same-sex couple, and they might be considering looking into the Irish heritage with maybe a thought about becoming an Irish citizen. And what would that mean for them if they considered going down the surrogacy route, being an Irish citizen? Some of those questions I can't answer. I'm not an immigration or any of those wonderful things, but I can try and point them in the right direction. So we're all about community, and it's all about staying connected.
I will put links in the show notes to the different organizations that you've mentioned, and making it a little easier for people to just click and follow so that they can learn more. Because as much as many people, myself included, have best intentions, sometimes if people don't make it easy for me to be able to do the thing that I say that and know that I want to do, then it just gets lost in the myriad of other things that need to be done in a day. So I will make it easy for people. You just have to click on the show notes and you will find links to all of the things that we have talked about. Before I let you dash off and have a little bit of time for yourself before it's time to tuck in for the night, I have one question I just want to ask you. What is your very, very, very favorite part of parenting Maisie and Matteo?
They both have two very individual things at the minute. So with Maisie, she's actually forever telling us that she loves us, which is amazing. Sometimes she uses it to her advantage. She's kind of copped onto that, but sometimes she might just randomly walk past you and like kiss you on the arm. And those moments are incredible, and they're very powerful, and they certainly secure the bond and the connection between parent and child. Matteo, obviously, he's at that point where he's trying to talk, but he can't quite get there. But if you are not in the room and you happen to walk past an open doorway and he spots you, he'll just give you the biggest smile. And that, again, is one of those kind of glowy, warm, fuzzy parenting moments. So yeah, I guess they will be my two at the moment. They change,
Sure.
But that's them for now.
I want to take the moment and just say thank you so much for making the time to chat with me today and sharing your story with myself and with my listeners. And here's hoping that we can do all of the kinds of legwork that need to be done to make things better and better and better, not just in Ireland, but around the world for queer parents.
Thank you so much for having me on. We really appreciate the time.
Excellent. As a queer individual with colonial lineage, I want to first acknowledge the land upon which I live and work. Being from what is now known as Burlington, Ontario, I recognize the original ancestry of these lands as they span from Lake Ontario to the Niagara Escarpment and beyond. These lands are steeped in Indigenous history that benefits my community every day. The territory is mutually covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy, the Ojibwe, and other allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. I would like to acknowledge that the land on which I stand is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. The land dictates everything about our ways of being. Particularly, the land teaches us about fluidity. Concepts of the binary system and heteropatriarchy were imposed by the colonials who were, at the same time, removing children from their homes, families, and all that was familiar to them. These same children were divided by the only two prescribed binaries recognized by the settlers, and they were forced to conform to a performative, gendered falsehood. The land doesn't operate under binary thinking. It is diverse, complex, and unpredictable at times. Rather, the land holds us and all of our remarkable pasts and identities. Every organism and spirit has a purpose. It is from this understanding that I strive to live and grow. Thank you for joining me today on the Becoming Baby Ready podcast. If you have a story that you'd like to share, or you know someone who might, if you're a professional who works in the capacity of helping people start and grow their families, and you identify as being a part of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community yourself, then please don't hesitate to reach out. We always have room for more stories to share, and there's always more learning to do.